Jennifer Walsh closed her laptop and looked out the window of her Boston office. 17 floors below, the Charles River caught the October light. She'd been reviewing site assessments all morning, parcels of land across New England, each one a potential future location for McDonald's Corporation. As regional manager for the company's New England field office, she spent her days analyzing traffic patterns, demographic data, and zoning regulations, identifying properties that could become the next successful restaurant location. She was good at her job. 10 years with the company, the last 3 in this role, a trajectory that suggested another promotion within 2 years. Her apartment in the South End was decorated, but rarely enjoyed. Her social calendar consisted entirely of work dinners, industry conferences, and occasional drinks with colleagues who talked about quarterly targets. She owned exactly 3 casual outfits, all designer labels purchased during hurried shopping trips between meetings, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd worn any of them. Even now, on what was supposed to be her day off, she wore tailored slacks and a crisp blouse, her hair pulled back in the same professional style she'd worn for years. The patterned scarf draped over her chair, the Burberry coat hanging on the door. These were the casual touches in a life that had no real separation between work and everything else. One parcel in particular had been on her radar for over a month. A piece of land at the western edge of Main Street in Gull'sHaven, Maine, where the developed part of town gave way to Route 7 and the woods beyond. The metrics looked promising: good visibility, adequate traffic counts for a coastal town, straightforward access. She'd requested preliminary information from the town's planning board weeks ago, and their response had been professional, thorough, neither eager nor hostile. Just factual. Jennifer scheduled a presentation with the Board of Selectmen and agreed to an informal public meeting to allow local residents to express concerns. Something low-key to gauge community sentiment before any formal proposal. She was quite aware of the resistance to franchise restaurants in other historical towns along the coast. She decided to take a week, part business, part personal time. The drive up the coast would be pleasant this time of year. She left Boston on a Tuesday morning, her Audi loaded with a rolling suitcase full of work-appropriate clothing, her laptop bag, and a leather portfolio containing site plans and demographic reports. The highway gradually gave way to smaller routes, the landscape shifting from suburban sprawl to pine forests and glimpses of water. By early afternoon, she crossed into Gull'sHaven, following Main Street as it sloped down toward the harbor. The town was smaller than she'd expected, quieter. White clapboard buildings lined the street, many with historic markers beside their doors. A few tourists walked the sidewalks, cameras in hand, but there was none of the summer crush the tourism websites described. October here felt like a town exhaling after holding its breath all season. The Blue House Inn sat halfway down Main Street, a federal-style building painted medium blue with white trim. Jennifer parked in the small lot beside it and retrieved her bag from the trunk. The innkeepers, Bill and Heather Martin, greeted her warmly, showed her to a second-floor room, and left her to settle in. She unpacked methodically, hanging her work clothes, arranging her laptop and files on the writing desk. Through the window, she could see the waterfront, fishing boats tied to docks, a few people moving about their work. The meeting at Town Hall was scheduled for the next morning. Jennifer spent the rest of the afternoon walking the town, getting a feel for the place. She noted the businesses, the mix of year-round operations and seasonal shops now mostly closed. Everything was well-maintained, cared for, the kind of town that took pride in its appearance. At the waterfront, she stood on the town dock and looked out at the harbor. A lighthouse was visible in the distance. The smell of the water was strong here, mixed with diesel and old wood and something else, maybe kelp or seaweed drying on the rocks. That evening, she ate dinner at the inn, reviewed her notes, and went to bed early. She woke to the sound of gulls and a gray morning that promised rain. Town Hall was a modest building on the western end of Main Street, brick with white trim and a small parking area. Jennifer arrived 10 minutes early and was shown to one of the office rooms by a clerk who offered coffee and seemed genuinely pleased to have a visitor. The Board of Selectmen arrived together. Seth Morrison introduced himself as the planning liaison, mid-30s, practical-looking, with an easy manner that put her at ease. Clara Winslow handled finance and administration, quiet but attentive. Harold McBride oversaw public works, friendly and folksy. The town attorney sat to one side, a woman in her 50s who said little but took careful notes. Seth explained that this was an informal discussion, a chance for Jennifer to understand the town's perspective before deciding whether to move forward with any proposal. He walked her through the zoning requirements for the parcel, the historical considerations, and the environmental review process. They discussed traffic patterns, infrastructure capacity, and the town's comprehensive plan. It was cordial, professional. No one panicked or made speeches. They simply laid out the facts, the procedures, the various points where community input would be required. Jennifer found herself impressed. These weren't people who would be easily pressured or fooled, but neither were they hostile to development on principle. They just wanted to understand what was being proposed and how it would affect their town. A public forum was scheduled for Friday evening, giving Jennifer a chance to hear possible concerns firsthand. Seth gave her a quick briefing on the procedures and what to expect, noting that he didn't think many would attend at this early stage. After the meeting, Jennifer met with the real estate agent to walk the property. The parcel sat at the point where Main Street became Route 7, the end of town where the buildings ended abruptly and the woods began. Good visibility from both directions, adequate setback from the street, room for parking, drive-through, all the standard requirements. The agent talked about recent sales in the area and the summer tourist influx. Jennifer made notes, took photos, and measured sight lines. On paper, it worked. It would be the first thing people saw coming into town from the west, the last thing they saw leaving. That could be good or bad, depending on how the community felt about it. With the business part of her day complete, Jennifer found herself at loose ends. It was just past noon, and she was hungry. She drove back to Main Street and parked near Marcy's Diner. The diner occupied the ground floor of a handsome building at the corner of Main and Bay Street. Jennifer thought it was odd to call this a diner until she walked inside. The place was about half full, locals mostly, with a few tourists in fleece and hiking boots. Jennifer took a place at the counter, on one of the round swivel stools. Marcy handed her a menu, and Nate came by with a glass of ice water. Bob Finch sat in his usual last booth, quietly eating, his head bent over his plate, as if protecting his food from a potential thief. On Wednesdays, Marcy served fresh fish and chips, and the place filled accordingly. She recommended it to Jennifer, who ordered one, along with a Diet Coke. Kenny's voice echoed through the pass-through window, making jokes about the weather, the Red Sox, and anything that came to mind. The food was very good, simple and fresh, the coleslaw obviously homemade. Jennifer found herself relaxing, watching the rhythm of the diner, the easy banter between staff and regulars. She watched Marcy as she moved through the room with a genuine smile, checking on tables and referring to almost everyone by name. Everyone laughed when she yelled into the kitchen, pleading with Kenny to come up with some new jokes. Bob Finch finished his meal and left money on the table. Just as he reached the door, Augustus Albee entered, hanging his coat on the rack. Bob shook Albee's hand, a little unexpectedly, introducing himself as Bob Finch and saying it was nice to meet him. Albee thought it was slightly odd, but thought no more of it. He took a seat at the counter near Jennifer, already thinking about the fish and chips, and asked for a double portion of coleslaw. Marcy mentioned how his last ghost tour had become the talk of the town, especially the special effects at the end. Augustus Albee accepted the praise gladly, enjoying his brief moment of recognition. Then the name caught up with him. Bob Finch, the Bull Island Ranger. Bob Finch. Albee shot up from his stool and rushed outside, the small brass bell above the door clattering in protest. He looked up the street, then down toward the harbor, but Bob was gone. When Albie came back inside, Marcy and Nate were laughing, along with most of the diner. Jennifer laughed too, swept up in the moment without quite understanding it. Kenny leaned out from the kitchen and called to the room, saying that Ghost Bob shakes everyone's hand eventually. When the laughter faded, the diner returned to its usual rhythm. Jennifer took a sip of her soda and glanced around the diner. No one seemed particularly surprised by what had just happened, only amused. Whatever the explanation was, it belonged to them, and they were comfortable leaving it there. For the first time since arriving, Jennifer realized she wasn't trying to figure the place out anymore. She was simply sitting in it. Late that night, the ghosts of Gull'sHaven gathered in the town hall assembly room. With curtains drawn, they arrived quietly, in ones and twos. Captain Elwood presided near the front. Bob Finch lingered at the rear. Abigail moved among them, and most of the town's spectral population took their seats in the wooden folding chairs. Captain Elwood called the meeting to order. The topic, he explained, was the proposed McDonald's restaurant. The discussion that followed would have been bewildering to any living person who might have witnessed it. Several ghosts weren't entirely clear on what McDonald's was. One woman asked if it had something to do with farms. A man in 1950s clothing mentioned the Hamburglar with great concern, asking if that was still an issue. Another wanted to know about the clowns, saying he could deal with ghosts in the woods, but clowns freaked him out. Abigail tried to explain about hamburgers and French fries and drive-through windows, which only led to more confusion about what exactly was being driven through windows. Bob Finch, still in his ranger uniform, said quietly that the issue wasn't what McDonald's was, but what it would mean. The first chain restaurant in Gull'sHaven. The beginning of something that wouldn't stop. There was plenty of land at the end of town. If one chain restaurant came, more would certainly follow. This sobered the group. Several nodded. A woman in a long white dress noted that they'd worked hard to keep the town as it was. A place where the past and present existed together without conflict. Captain Elwood asked for suggestions. The discussion grew animated but remained surprisingly practical. They couldn't directly stop the project. Legality was for the living. But they could make their presence known. They could attend the public hearing, be visible, be numerous. There was no dissent. On Friday night, they would return to the hall, a living reminder of what Gull'sHaven was and what it had quietly agreed to remain. The meeting adjourned, and the assembly room emptied as quietly as it had filled. Jennifer had no meeting scheduled for Thursday. The day belonged to her. She got a coffee from the dining room, then spent an hour back in her room reviewing her presentation. She already knew it by heart. The gathering wasn't even a formal hearing, just a preliminary introduction for local residents. But she had always believed in being prepared, even when preparation wasn't strictly necessary. Jennifer spent much of the day driving without a plan, following Route 7 back through the woods and then cutting over to US 1 along the coast. The air was cool with the clean edge of mid-October, the trees past their brightest but still holding color in quiet patches of gold and rust. She rolled the windows down and let the miles pass, small towns slipping by without asking anything of her. By the time she turned back toward Gull'sHaven, the light was already lowering, and the day felt fuller than she had expected, as though it had given her something she had not known she was looking for. That evening, Jennifer wandered toward the waterfront as the day gave way to night. Streetlights along Main Street blinked on one by one, reflecting softly off shop windows and the quiet harbor beyond. She told herself she was walking for the air, for the feel of the town settling in for the night, but her steps kept drifting in the same direction. The rusty anchor had caught her eye more than once over the past few days, its worn exterior and unassuming presence standing apart from everything else. Until now, she had only passed it by. Tonight, curiosity was enough to carry her to the door. It was still early for a Thursday evening, and she wasn't sure what to expect as she stepped inside. The interior was all fishing nets, worn wood, and framed photographs, welcoming in a way that felt earned. The place was nearly empty. Roy stood behind the bar with a college basketball game playing on the television above him, glancing between Jennifer and a replay as he greeted her. She took a seat at the bar and ordered a glass of wine, expecting something ordinary, but he poured her a decent Pinot Noir without comment. At the far end of the bar sat a man in a cowboy hat, mostly in shadow, still enough to make her uneasy. The hat made him look like he had stepped out of an old cigarette advertisement from the 1960s. In the next room, a young couple shared an appetizer, laughing quietly, and the sight settled her. Roy asked if she wanted to see a menu, and she told him she was fine for now. Jennifer had been nursing her wine for 20 minutes or so when the door swung open and Abigail and Kylie came in together, bringing with them a burst of laughter that seemed to wake the room. Abigail was impossible to miss, dressed in one of her eccentric combinations, layered colors, scarves, and jewelry that suggested she dressed for herself and no one else. She moved easily, greeting Roy as though she belonged there. Kylie followed just behind her, quieter at first glance, with an open, curious expression and a presence that felt warm without trying. They took seats at the bar a few stools down, and Jennifer wasn't quite sure what to make of them. A moment later, Marcy stepped inside and recognized Jennifer immediately from the diner, her face lighting up as she came closer to say hello. Marcy looked different, her apron replaced by tight jeans, pumps, and a simple blouse that suited her. Jennifer barely had time to consider excusing herself when Abigail ordered a round of wine for the group and announced that it was far too nice an evening to sit alone at the bar. Just like that, the decision was made for her. Jennifer found herself included, no invitation required. Conversation came easily once the wine had settled in. Kylie mentioned that it had been a long day on the water, rougher than expected, the kind of day that left her tired in a way sleep alone wouldn't fix. Abigail listened with exaggerated sympathy, then turned her attention to Jennifer, her eyes flicking over the cut of her jacket and the careful lines of her dress. She teased her gently about dressing like she might be headed to a magazine shoot rather than a harbor bar, all in good fun. Jennifer laughed and asked about Abigail's outfit in return, curious despite herself. Abigail explained, quite seriously, that different pieces came from different centuries, as though that were the most ordinary thing in the world. Marcy smiled into her wine, saying nothing, while Kylie listened with mild amusement, used to hearing strange things around town and too busy most days to dwell on them. Jennifer took it all at face value, filing it under local eccentricity. Another round of wine appeared, then another. When Abigail decided they should move into the other room to play Shuffle Alley, it was less a suggestion than a declaration. She ordered appetizers without asking, refusing to entertain the idea of restraint. Slim emerged quietly from the kitchen with plates of tacos, nachos, and loaded fries, setting them down with a nod before returning to his usual place at the end of the bar. A few more people drifted in as the evening wore on, the bar slowly filling with conversation and movement. Abigail asked Roy to turn down the television. The jukebox came to life instead, old songs spilling out into the room, familiar enough to invite participation without demanding it. Abigail was the first to start dancing, pulling the others in without hesitation. Wine softened the edges of everything, laughter coming easier, movements growing looser. Jennifer found herself laughing harder than she could remember in years, the kind of laughter that caught her off guard. Not the measured kind reserved for corporate dinners or networking events, and not even the careful ease she maintained with friends back in Boston, where everything felt faintly performed, part of maintaining the right image. Here, in a fisherman's bar along the coast of Maine, wearing clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, she felt more like herself than she had in a very long time. At some point, she realized she was slightly drunk, pleasantly so. Abigail paid the tab without ceremony, Roy shaking his head and wondering aloud how the ghosts in town always seemed to have cash and always paid their way. Abigail lingered at the bar talking with him, while Marcy and Kylie walked Jennifer back toward the Blue House Inn. The three of them linked arms against the October chill, their breath visible beneath the streetlights as they made their way up the quiet street. Back in her room, Jennifer sat by the window, looking out toward the harbor. Tomorrow's presentation drifted into her thoughts, the site, the purpose of the trip, the role she was meant to be playing. Somewhere in the middle of it all, she sensed that something had shifted. She couldn't name it yet, but she felt it clearly enough, a question forming that she hadn't allowed herself to ask before. What if there was more than one way to live? What if the pace she had kept for the last decade, the constant striving and measuring, wasn't the only option? She fell asleep in the chair, still dressed, the room quiet around her. Friday evening, the town hall assembly room filled earlier than Jennifer expected. By 6:45, 15 minutes before the scheduled start, nearly every seat was taken, with people standing along the walls. Jennifer stood near the small stage beside Seth Morrison, aware of her posture, careful not to show her surprise. The crowd was unlike anything she had anticipated. Locals filled the front rows, but scattered among them were people dressed in historical clothing, colonial coats, Victorian dresses, early 20th century workwear. It wasn't a performance. The fabrics looked worn, lived in, chosen with care. The effect was quietly unsettling, as though the town had invited its past to sit in on the conversation. She spotted Abigail and Marcy near the center of the room. They noticed her at the same moment and lifted their hands in a small wave, encouraging, familiar. The gesture caught her off guard. She realized, with a strange flicker of warmth, that she wasn't being treated like an outsider, more like someone already included. Seth greeted people as they arrived, unhurried, unsurprised by the turnout. Clara Winslow and Harold McBride took their seats near the front. The town attorney observed from the back, notebook closed, simply watching. At 7 o'clock exactly, Augustus Albee stepped forward, tricorn hat in place, a small brass bell in his hand. He rang it once, sharply, and the room settled. He introduced himself with theatrical confidence as the town crier of Gull'sHaven, welcomed the assembly, and reminded everyone that they were gathered not just to discuss a proposal, but to consider the future of the town they shared. It was ceremonial, but effective. Seth explained the purpose of the meeting. No vote, no decision. A preliminary discussion only. An opportunity for information and questions. Jennifer stepped forward. She had done this dozens of times. Planning boards, councils, executives. This should have felt routine. Instead, she felt uncertain, standing before a room that seemed to be listening with more care than she was used to. She outlined her role, the site, the early stage of the assessment. She emphasized that nothing was decided, that interest alone did not equal intent. She covered the economic factors, the potential impacts, the unknowns. The room listened quietly. As she spoke, she became aware of how familiar her language sounded to her own ears, how often she had delivered variations of the same presentation. This time, it felt thinner. Looking out at the room, at the care evident even in the way people had dressed, she found herself choosing her words more carefully. When she finished, she thanked them, not reflexively, but sincerely. She told them she had been struck by the town, by the way people seemed to hold it with intention. She acknowledged that whatever happened next belonged to them. Applause followed, restrained but genuine. Questions came, thoughtful and specific, about traffic, about environmental review, about precedent. Jennifer answered honestly, admitting uncertainty when it existed. It was the most straightforward presentation she could remember giving. After an hour, Seth brought the meeting to a close. Augustus Albee rang his bell again, offered a final flourish, and declared the assembly adjourned. People lingered, talking quietly. Several approached Jennifer to thank her. No hostility, no suspicion, just courtesy. As the room emptied, She watched the people in historical dress file out alongside their neighbors. It felt less like a reenactment than a continuation. Back at the Blue House Inn, Jennifer opened her laptop and stared at the screen. The report could wait until morning. Instead, she sat by the window, watching the lighthouse, thinking about the week she'd spent here. She stayed through the weekend, walked Main Street, watched the boats come and go. Her report, finished Sunday night, was thorough and accurate. She noted that the town's commitment to historical preservation, combined with the potential for public backlash, made the site an unfavorable candidate. Her recommendation was clear: do not proceed. Monday morning, she drove back to Boston. The city felt louder than she remembered. The office felt sharper and conversations narrower. She noticed how tired everyone looked, herself included. The familiarity offered no comfort. She hadn't noticed it before, but even her friendships here carried an edge, as if everyone were quietly keeping score. She thought about Gull'sHaven more than she expected. The following Friday, she left work early and drove north without an agenda. Somewhere along the way, she stopped at a department store and bought a pair of loose-fitting jeans, comfortable Reeboks, a thick wool sweater, and a baseball cap. She arrived in Gull'sHaven in the late afternoon, driving past the for sale sign on the parcel, past Town Hall and the Blue House Inn. She caught sight of Marcy through the diner window. A quiet sense of ease settled over her as she continued to the waterfront. The Rusty Anchor was empty, the bar calm. Roy poured her a glass of wine without asking. Slim remained at the end of the bar, and when she looked toward him, he gave a brief tilt of his hat, a silent greeting that needed no words. For the first time in days, she felt no hurry, no agenda, just the slow rhythm of the town and her place within it. After a while, the door opened. Abigail stepped inside, wearing another improbable combination of clothes. She smiled when she saw Jennifer, as if this outcome had always been obvious. She joined her at the bar, ordered wine, and said nothing. They sat together, unhurried. Jennifer let the silence of the bar and the gentle motion of the harbor settle around her. For the first time in years, she could stop comparing herself and simply be. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more stories from Gull'sHaven, please like and subscribe. Thank you.